If you've had the opportunity to see the Northern Lights or the aurora borealis, or the aurora australis in some quiet, natural environment, natural setting, I think you'd agree with me that this is truly one of nature's most profoundly beautiful, serene, and emotionally evocative phenomena. I like to say that the first time I saw the aurora in a place like this changed something inside of me and changed something about the way that I look at the world. I'm a physicist, and I study the aurora. And today I'm here to share a story with you, and I call that story How I Met Steve, and that'll make sense about halfway through this talk. But first, what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about what I do in my job. My research team and I build and deploy cameras all across Canada that capture images of the night sky over and over and over again, night after night, day after day, year after year, all the way across Canada, and we use that, I like to say, to study the aurora. But what I'm really doing is actually taking that information from the images and using that to remote sense some things that are going on a little further out in space in a region we call the magnetosphere that is otherwise invisible to us. And so in a very real sense, for me, it's not my cameras, but it's actually the aurora that is my scientific instrument. I work with NASA, I work with the European and Canadian space agencies, I work with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Hundreds of researchers around the world use my data, together with data from a constellation of scientific satellites in the Earth's magnetosphere that's worth billions of dollars. I could stand here and make that sound exciting, okay? But that would be disingenuous, because when I do that, invariably I'm trading on the cool factor of space, right? And it's not really true to how I spend my time, because what I am is a scientist, and I sit and look at my data and do things that are, on a day-to-day basis, unless you're interested in something like how pitch angle diffusion of 10 kiloelectron volt electrons by lower band chorus near the inner edge of the plasma sheet causes patchy pulsating aurora. Unless you're interested in that, what I do is not very interesting, and I guarantee you that I'm the only person in the room who cares about that, okay? So, I hope you'll understand that I'm not going to talk per se about what I do, but rather I'm going to share with you something that has happened to me over the last couple of years that has changed my relationship with how I do my work, and also has brought a lot of joy to myself and to many people that I've now come to interact with on a fairly regular basis. Okay? Now, what I am is an observer of nature, an observer of the night sky. For the last 20 years, I've been building a system which does what I described earlier. 20 years ago, in 1997, we had one camera operating at Gillam, Manitoba. It took one image every 20 seconds, one image every minute, and it wasn't a very good image. Now we have more than 50 imagers operating from coast to coast across Canada, taking dozens and dozens of images a minute, and they're much better images than they used to be. 20 years ago, we used to struggle moving megabytes of information around, and now we're struggling now we routinely and easily move terabytes of information around. We used to wait months to get our data back from the field. Now we get our data back from the field in real time. Because of the information technology explosion that we're living in, we can do things now that we wouldn't have dreamed possible just 20 years ago, and it's been wonderful. Now, but really, no matter the fact that this is bigger and better and faster and more impressive than what we were doing before, conceptually, it's no different. We're just scientists, professional scientists, who are collecting data and looking at problems that we know are already there. And so what I want to do now is go into the story of how I met Steve. And so back in 2016, early 2016, a friend of mine named Liz McDonald came to the University of Calgary Department of Astronomy and Physics to give a colloquium, a talk. Liz runs what's called a citizen science program for the U.S. National Science Foundation, and that program connects professional auroral scientists with people who are auroral enthusiasts out in the public. It connects people who take pictures with scientists. They troll Twitter looking for instances where people are saying they're seeing the aurora right now, and they make real-time maps of where the aurora probably is based on that. It's a really cool project, and it's called Aurorasaurus, and I would recommend to people, if you're interested in it, take a look at it, okay? Now, We're a small department of physics at the University of Calgary, and our Friday afternoon colloquia do not draw crowds like this, I will tell you. Normally I go into the room, and there might be 15 people there for such a talk. I'll know every one of them, and they'll have their computers open, and that'll be how it looks. I went in for Liz's talk, and the room was packed. And not only that, I knew almost nobody there. And so I turned to Liz, and I said, well, what's going on here? Who are these people? Well, it turns out they were from a Facebook group called the Alberta Aurora Chasers. This is a group of night sky photography enthusiasts who like to drive around the countryside at night and take pictures of the aurora. This is their Facebook page. They have about 15,000 members now. It's a very popular group, and it's a very interesting group to interact with. And for them, Liz is a bit of a rock star. Literally, she's a rocket scientist. Literally, she works for NASA, and she studies the aurora for a living. Okay? And so this is why they were there. After Liz's colloquium, the Aurora Chasers, Liz, myself, went over to a bar near campus and got into a good discussion over some beer. And they started showing me their photographs of the aurora. And there were photographs like this. And what I quickly came to realize was that these people I was interacting with were some of the best auroral photographers in the world. These are professional quality amateur photographers who have a passion for this. And during our conversation, one of the chasers, a guy named Neil Zeller, said, just casually, I took a picture of the proton arc last night. And I said, well, no, you didn't. And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, no, you didn't. He said, yeah, I did. And so I said, well, okay, why don't you show me what you took a picture of? Because for me, the Proton Aurora, I knew he didn't do that because it's always subvisual. It's always too dim to be seen, so he wouldn't even know to take a picture of it. He'd opened up his computer and showed me an image like this of this little purple streak across the sky. I didn't know what it was. I knew it wasn't the Proton Aurora. It's very beautiful. And when he told me where and when he had taken the image, for reasons that I won't get into here, I knew this was fundamentally different than any phenomena I had ever seen before in the night sky. And so I said, you know, that there's this ethos that we have in science, which is that if you're going to use a physical mechanism to describe something in a name, then that physical mechanism should have something to do with that phenomena. And so for me, you know, this is not Proton Aurora, so I said, please don't call it the Proton Aurora. And so you know, they agreed. They're a smart group of people, and they agreed. And then a week later, one of them, Chris Ratzlaff, posted on the page, why don't we call it Steve? And the reason why he suggested we call it Steve has to do with a children's movie called Over the Hedge, where these animals wake up after hibernating, find a hedge, they're scared of it, they don't know what it is, but if they call it Steve, it's a little bit less scary, okay? So not that this thing is particularly scary, all right? So this name caught on, and over the next few months, I started to see on the Alberta Chasers Facebook page comments like, Steve was high in the sky over Alberta last night. Here's a picture of Steve over Lac des Arcs. Here's a picture of Steve from Chestermere, and so on. But I still didn't know what Steve was. And neither did Liz, and I would assert nobody on the planet did, actually. And so I have my data, and if I could figure out what Steve looked like in my data, which is decidedly less beautiful than their photographs, let me tell you, but if I could find it in my data, then I could actually bring a whole bunch of other quantitative things to bear on figuring out what this is. And so a group of us got together and combed over my data, and we found this signature in it, this ethereal, luminous feature that we thought was promising. We didn't know if it was Steve. But we had a plan, and that was we would wait, find the signature in my data some night, and see if some Alberta chaser took a picture of it. And we waited, and less than 4 weeks later, we got this signature from a camera that we operated in a place called Lucky Lake, Saskatchewan. And I went onto Facebook and did something I never thought I would do as part of my professional life, which is I typed in, did anybody see Steve last night? And 5 minutes later, a woman named Song Loria from Vimy, Alberta, who took a photograph at exactly the time we were imaging Steve, not too far away, and she messaged me this image, and we knew this was Steve. And then everything fell into place in literally just a matter of hours for us. The European Space Agency has a set of satellites that carry instruments from the University of Calgary that look at properties to do with the charged particles in the upper atmosphere. One of those 3 satellites flew through Steve right during the time we were imaging it. And we found out from that Steve is in fact probably not aurora. It corresponds to a little river of very, very fast moving gas that's moving at 7 kilometers per second from east to west, and it extends all the way from Hudson Bay in this instance all the way over to Alaska. If you were to look at this from space, it would look like somebody had reached in with a purple felt pen and drawn a little line on the globe thousands of kilometers from east to west. And what's more, the gas in that region is extremely hot. The swarm instrument told us it was about 6,000 degrees Kelvin or Celsius, which would make it probably the hottest place on Earth at that time. And I imagine the headline for me, which would be astonished Calgary scientist finds hottest place on Earth over Lucky Lake, Saskatchewan. That did not come though, okay? All right, so what we've done is we've gone very quickly from not knowing this phenomena existed in the scientific community to knowing this phenomena existed and then finding out what it was. And this was a revolution from my perspective. This represents the fact that we are in a fundamentally new era. And the era it's enabled by this information technology explosion. But the new thing and the fundamentally different thing is the social media connection between these truly phenomenally talented amateur watchers of nature, and scientists who tend to focus on things that we already know is there. And so as we go forward, I'm really excited at the prospect that we can get together with these amateurs in this way and come across discoveries maybe at a faster pace. And so it's, and also I would say that I will finish with saying that a lot of people have told me that they think that the use of the word Steve for this is somewhat undignified. Okay, and I will say that my answer to that is that it's fun. Okay, but more than that, if you think about physics, for instance, using whimsical names for things is not unprecedented, because in particle physics they talk about charm and color and quark and so on, and and these are meant to be meaningless words because they describe things that we didn't understand when they were first identified. But I also have this concept of a thing called a backronym. And I'll finish with a comment that at the last American Geophysical Union meeting in December in San Francisco, I gave a talk on this. And I said during it, it'd be really cool if we could find words that would make Steve an acronym, right? That would mean something meaningful. And I got through to the end of my talk, and a friend of mine in the question and answer period stood up, and he said, Bob Lysak from the University of Minnesota. And I thought he had a question, but he stood up and he said, sudden thermal emission velocity enhancement, which actually is a perfect backronym for what Steve is. And if we're right about this, that's what this thing will go down in the literature as. And so, thank you.